Okay. Everyone ready? Can we begin? Yes. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Margaret Nowicki from DPI, and it is my honor to introduce our guests, Deputy Secretary General Asha-Rose Migiro, His Excellency Mr. Ghazi Jomaa, Permanent Representative of Tunisia to the United Nations, and Her Excellency Tiina Intelmann, the Permanent Representative of Estonia to the United Nations. Ambassadors Intelmann and Jomaa served as the co-facilitators of the General Assembly resolution on system-wide coherence, which is expected to be adopted by the General Assembly this afternoon at 3 o'clock. They are with us this morning to inform us about a landmark development in UN history, the creation of UN Women, the UN entity for gender equality and the empowerment of women. I would like to first call on Ambassador Intelmann to make remarks. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. Indeed, member states have decided to create a new gender entity for gender equality and empowerment of women to be called UN Women. And this entity was created on the basis of 4 existing UN structures to overcome the previously existing fragmentation. UN Women is tasked to carry out normative activities in headquarters, but also operational activities in the field. This entity has a universal mandate to deal with the empowerment of women in all countries. But at the same time, as we are approaching critical deadlines of MDGs, this entity will have to fill a very critical gap in our common work towards the achievement of MDG goals. The decision on UN Women is in fact part of a package of measures that the United Nations is taking to enhance coherence of its development system to better respond to the needs of developing countries. UN Women will also be responsible for gender mainstreaming across the United Nations system. You may know that negotiations have taken more than 4 years, and the gender entity will have a head at undersecretary level to be appointed by the Secretary General. This resolution was unanimously agreed by an informal plenary meeting of the General Assembly on June 30th, and we expect that it will be formally endorsed by the General Assembly at 3 o'clock today. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, I would now like to call on Ambassador Jomaa.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Just to add what was said by Ambassador of Estonia, that she said the new entity will have a new head as USG, and also the big achievement during this reform that also women, UN Women, the entity will have also a new executive board. This is also a big achievement we reached this during this negotiation, during these negotiations. And also is not only this, because if you take it, that's what I wanted to add at this stage, is that really it is, I think, the biggest reform we have embarked in during the last, if I am not wrong, the last 20 years. Last 20 years, the biggest reform in UN. We reached it, and this is the best message that we can send to the world, that when we put hand in hand, in UN, I mean, Secretariat, member states, all stakeholders in the UN, we can advance things. And really, in those, we have been long negotiation on this, but the end is happy really, and that's really what's the best message we can give the world, that because UN can advance things. And especially in this resolution, if you see also, we are speaking about the new entity, UN Women, but also we embarked in other sectors that touches really very important very sectors of UN, about a question of development, about operational activities, about harmonization of the system, about funding, about governance. You see how many sectors we touched on them, and really it is a big achievement. I think it is a big achievement thanks to all member states together with Secretariat And this is what I wanted to add at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Jomaa. Now I'm pleased to call upon Deputy Secretary General Migiro.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to join this briefing ahead of this afternoon's expected adoption by the General Assembly of a resolution on system-wide coherence, and in particular, the establishment of UN Women. I would like to thank Ambassador Tiina Intelmann of Estonia and Ambassador Ghazi Jomaa of Tunisia for their presence today, and I congratulate them most heartily for the excellent job that they did in bringing the whole process together and for their stewardship of these important consultations. I welcome what will be an historic move by the General Assembly today in establishing UN Women, an entity designed to accelerate progress in meeting the needs of women and girls worldwide. I would like to acknowledge the hard work and determination of our member states in reaching this agreement and the years of advocacy by the global women's movement, which has been instrumental in making UN Women a reality. Today's action will do more than simply consolidate United Nations offices. It will consolidate United Nations strengths. The UN has made significant progress in advancing gender equality over the last decades, not least due to the dedication of its staff, and I take this opportunity to pay special tribute to our staff in the current 4 gender entities and the work they have been doing so far. But despite major achievements, the United Nations has faced some serious challenges, including inadequate funding and fragmentation, with no single recognized driver to direct UN activities on gender equality issues. UN Women will address such challenges and will focus on 2 key roles. First, to support intergovernmental bodies in their formulation of policies, global standards, and norms, and secondly, to help member states to implement these standards, standing ready to provide suitable technical and financial support to those countries that request it, as well as forging effective partnership with civil society. UN Women will also strengthen coherence in the UN system on gender-related issues, enhancing, not replacing, efforts by other parts who continue to have a responsibility to work for these goals. And the new entity will help the United Nations system to be accountable for its own commitments on gender equality, including regular monitoring of system-wide progress. The strengthened commitment of member states is crucial for accelerated progress towards the goals of gender equality and women's empowerment. A strong financial basis for UN Women will be key to such progress. In the coming months, Secretary General Ban will appoint an Under-Secretary General to head UN Women and is inviting suggestions from member states and civil society partners. The SG is committed to an open, transparent, and rigorous recruitment process. Dear friends, UN Women will give women and girls the strong, unified voice they deserve on the world stage. This is a positive and exciting moment for all the United Nations family, and I believe for the world. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary General. We'll now take your questions. Edie, please.
Thank you. I have several questions. I'd like to ask the 2 ambassadors why, if you're calling this a really major reform, you came up with an official name that calls this the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality. Why did it have to be an entity which, if you look it up in the dictionary, is actually defined as anything that has to do with independence? It's not an organization. It's not a forum. It's not an agency. And putting the word gender in. I've talked to some ambassadors who have said that this is a word that's very difficult to translate in some languages. But in addition to that, I'd also like you to tell us what were the biggest obstacles in reaching this agreement, because there were a lot of intense, difficult negotiations, as we know. Thank you.
Ambassadors?
Gender, yes, please. We start.
Thank you very much. Why is it not an agency? Why is it not a forum? As I said, the member states have decided to consolidate 4 existing structures of the United Nations into one entity. And partly these structures were part of the United Nations Secretariat, and partly also fund and program. UNIFEM was a fund. So by consolidating these existing structures, we ended up with a composite entity which is not an agency, but at the same time which is also not part of the UN Secretariat. But the name, this is the name that member states wanted to give to this entity. Of course, it may be that it is not so easy to translate it, but this is the best idea that member states had. And also, we must bear in mind that there are 192 member states. It's always very difficult to reach consensus. The obstacles. Yes, there were a number of obstacles, but we must really bear in mind how many negotiating parties there are at the United Nations. And I think that one positive thing was that everybody realized that if we really wanted the United Nations to act and also act for the achievement of MDGs, then the United Nations system needed to be changed, including paying more attention to the issues of women in order to be visible and to be active and efficient. I think that everybody agreed on that, and of course it was hard to reach agreement on each and every detail, but we were finally able to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to add to that also by why the entity. You said why this called UN Women an entity, is a composite entity, because if you see in the United Nations system, if we would have established an agency, it would not work as efficiently as the entity, because the entity, if you see for the reform, there is the normative side of dealing with women all over the world, and there is the operational side. Now we mixed all the operational side in this new executive board, while the normative, it will be then we have the CSW, we have the, and that's why then an entity has to cover all those. It's then the operational, the operation and the normative side. That's why it has to be an entity, composite entity, but not a specialized agency or something like that. About obstacle or difficulties in negotiation, it is normal. It is normal in the United Nations when you embark in a negotiation. What it covers, not only because you mentioned about the entity, when it covers also an entity, it covers multi-sector. You see, for example, it covers multi-sector dealing with UN. You see, for example, financing. It deals with in the fifth committee. Then money stakeholder. You deal also with development. You deal with women affairs. You deal with civil society. You deal with everything. Then that's why normally to bring people together in those, normally there are obstacles. But happily in this obstacle, of course, we could bridge them in 4 or 5 months. While we have negotiation, they stay now for 10 or 15 years. This is normal in obstacle to have obstacle, because we are divergent in the United Nations between developing LDCs, all those kind of component of United Nations membership. Always there are difficulties, but when there is the goodwill, then we can bridge those difficulties, and this is what happened during this process. Thank you.
Neil?
Neil from the New York Times. I guess I'd like you to explain how you think the mandate, what specifically is in the mandate that's going to make this entity different in terms of the work that it's doing compared to the previous 4 agencies. How is it going to be stronger? What in the mandate makes it stronger? And secondly, I understand that there were some differences between sort of the first world and the rest of the world in terms of the first world looking at it for advancing women's rights, and the others looking at it as a means to empower women's development, and putting the emphasis in 2 different places. And I'm wondering how that compromise worked out, because obviously there's different interpretations of the role of women in different parts of the world. So how do you see that came out in the final document?
Me? Okay. So the first question about how is it going to be different now? The understanding of member states was that it is really useless to engage in this exercise unless we create something that is bigger and stronger than just the sum of the existing 4. And I think that it had been recognized for a long time that the normative part of dealing with women's empowerment was a little bit isolated from the operational part carried out by UNIFEM. And member states had taken a look at it, not speaking about the high-level panel that took a look at the issue years ago. So it is not something that we with Ambassador Jomaa came up with. There had been in-depth discussions about that, including at the level of the civil society. Now, the expectation had been that this will become stronger and more powerful than the sum of 4. And we have also added the additional mandate of this entity being responsible for gender mainstreaming across the UN system, which is something that had been an issue that had been neglected as member states feel. If we speak about the strength, that strength has to come also through the appointment of a visionary and active head of the entity at undersecretary level, and also the strength has to come from additional donor money that is expected to flow into the entity. Gender mainstreaming is taking a look at the issues of women serving inside the United Nations system, and how women are represented across the United Nations system as a whole. Another thing is a different focus on rights and on development, and what this entity is exactly going to do. I think that the mandate is sufficiently broad, and member states have made clear that the mandate is universal, so that the entity is going to focus on all countries, but at the same time, the operational activities to be undertaken by this entity at country level have to happen at the request of member states. And as we stand now, as the situation is now, why was the situation unsatisfactory in terms of UNIFEM operating on country level was that there were so many requests by member states for assistance, there was not enough money. There was not enough power coming with that money, and we expect this situation to be rectified now.
Thank you. Evelyn.
Can you explain something more about the money? The DSG said they were going to give financial help, and they don't have any more money than they had, the 4 entities together had. So do you expect, do you have promises of voluntary contributions? And also, why were some of the G77 countries upset about development when UNIFEM does just that?
About additional money, should I say?
About money, why?
About money, yeah.
Of course, maybe I can answer one of the elements about additional money. And to answer also, gentlemen, before you about what is the exact mandate, what is the new thing. The new, all we know here, we now are in the United Nations systems or in all big organization. Coordination is very important. when you work in a vertical manner, they are separated. But when you are vertical on horizontal, and this is what we wanted by this creation, to work in a coordination. When you coordinate manner, even with the amount of money, you can save a lot of money. You can better deliver. Better delivering also save money, but also bring money. When the donor countries, they see it is a better delivering for all these women, then money will come. With the flow of money will be more important. It justifies more, much better for their parliament. For their parliament, how to put money for this organization. This is the big achievement, what we said. Why to bring all together than together in an entity, to better coordinate, to better deliver. To better deliver. This is one of the main points about this funding, but what you asked. Thank you.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Yeah, please. Well, if we look at the previous funding of these four structures of the United Nations, part of them were funded by assessed contributions, and part of them were funded from voluntary contributions. And as these negotiations were carried on, the donors who were providing these voluntary contributions were more and more hesitant to increase their contribution because they did not know what was going to happen, if the entity was going to be created or if UNIFEM was going to stand alone. And I think that there is a big expectation from the part of donors to see this entity materialize, and there have been repeated pledges by big donors to increase money once this entity is created. So we are really hopeful that the whole all these activities will be at a completely different level right now.
Sure, I wanted to I noticed in the resolution that there are 6 seats for contributing countries, 4 of them to be given to the largest providers of voluntary core contributions. So I just sort of wondered, maybe I haven't seen that before, but is there, what's the precedent in the UN system for having sort of, I don't want to say pay to play, but having the more money you give, you can basically have a seat? And what would you say to those who say it goes against the idea of the UN, sort of every country having the same amount of say? And then I wanted to ask, I noticed in one of the Q&As that you passed out, and also the DSG, you said that it's going to be an open, transparent, and rigorous process. At least one NGO has said, that it's not that names are being whispered in the corridors, governments alone have been formally requested to submit candidates, and that this makes a mockery of fair and open. So what I wonder is, can you say what names have been suggested? Many people have talked about Michelle Bachelet. Some people have said Radhika Kumaraswamy. Have names actually been put forward? And and what will open mean if the names aren't announced? Will there be like a short list of some kind? Anyway, so let me leave it at that for now.
Thank you.
Maybe.
I will answer the first question.
Exactly, but maybe then about the USG appointment.
I should answer that now, or after
I've
you?
answered the first question and
Yeah,
about the
after you.
president. Yes, you asked about the president. Yes, there are a president here. If you look to PPC, for example, the PPC, there is the president about the contributing to the troop, to the financing of the United Nations. Then they have seats, etc., because it is a composite. If you see, for example, in the PPC, there are under those elected under General Assembly, those under ECOSOC, and those the major contributors. And here, when we embarked in this negotiation, there were a point. You create a new entity, new composite entity, big entity. What will be the composition of the board? Then it has to be as the composition. You take the repartition, geographical repartition, the charter, the Article 101 of the charter, about the General Assembly repartition, about percentage for the regional group. Then, but as this, of course, it is excellent thing to do, but also you have to take into account that contributor countries, the largest contributor has to be there. That's why we found this hybrid really formulation about these adding six contributing countries, and not only from developed countries, but also from developing country contributor, because as that you encourage more and more contributions, even from developing country, if they want to be really there. This is how about the precedent you spoke. There are precedent, and we work on that precedent. Thank you.
Yes, about the selection process. In the month of April this year, Secretary General wrote to member states inviting them to start thinking about names, so that once the resolution is passed, immediately he starts the process of selection. And so far we have had 8 countries suggesting names. And this is what we expected. We expected that we'll get the names, and we have them so far. But in anticipation that the resolution will be passed this afternoon, Secretary General will now give a deadline, because now we're sure an agreement has been reached. We'll give a deadline for countries to come forward to increase the number of proposed names that we have. So this is what is going to happen. And as regards names being floated out there, I think that is normal and natural, because this is an important piece of reform that the United Nations is doing. There is a lot of interest in the gender, in the UN Women, in an entity like this one. So it is not surprising. And in the world out there, particularly the activist groups, know who could do a good job in this regard. So it is not surprising. But we're waiting for member states to bring names, and then we will look at the names. SG will look at the names against the qualifications that we set out. We want somebody who is strong, who has got experience, has got skills in gender and women's empowerment issues, somebody who can mobilize resources. We have these qualifications sent out to member states and other stakeholders. So on the basis of this, then, there will be a list of people to be I don't like to call it interview. These will be senior people, very well sound, which will be an interaction with them to see now if we can have those skills out there. And then there will be a proposal to Secretary General, and the process will come from there. He might also wish to interact with them before sharing the name, probably with key holders like member states themselves and so on. The process will have to put it together properly, but that is basically what is going to happen.
Could I just ask one follow-up on that? I think in your opening you'd said that he's asking for names from countries, but also from NGO partners.
Yes.
I mean, so thus far only countries have submitted names, but are you saying between now and the deadline that people can be considered whether or not they're submitted by a country?
Yeah, we expect that. We expect that civil society and other people will suggest names. And you may be interested to know that it is not that a country necessarily proposes a name of its own national. We have had a country suggesting, for instance, like you were saying, we want Asha-Rose. We have had something like that, for instance. No, it hasn't happened, but this is example. I want to give my own example. No, the U.S. luckily has not suggested me. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Rachel Harris, and I work with the Women's Environment and Development Organization, and we're a part of the GEAR campaign. And actually, Sarah over here asked the questions that I wanted to ask, particularly about civil society engagement within the USG, the transparent selection process for the USG. But I just also wanted to congratulate everyone. We're excited, our membership is excited about this new entity, and we're really looking forward to the next few months and years of development. So thank you.
Thank you. If I may just comment on what she has just said, GEAR and other civil society organizations have worked with us throughout the negotiations, sharing information, sharing the qualifications and so on in this regard. But even in other appointments, we have had non-member states coming and making suggestions, and we take them very, very seriously. When they give us names, CVs, and strong candidates, we also consider this. We can put them on the list. So we look forward. And I do know that you have asked for a meeting with us, and we have already scheduled that. So this is part of the transparency that we are talking about.
Thank you. Yes, please, Edie.
In the Millennium Development Goals report, the goal on empowering women did not get terribly high marks. I noticed that in the resolution, the framework for UN Women is the Beijing platform. I don't see that reflected here at all. And in terms of, how this is really shaped, at least in my quick reading of what I've seen here. And I wondered whether that means that that's just going to be words on paper, or is this new entity actually going to really focus on implementing the Beijing platform to achieve equality for women?
I'm not sure I got the question. What do you mean here?
I'm sorry. In all of the paper, in all of the papers that's been handed out, and in everything that you've said about, you know, what this organization, what this new entity is going to do, I don't see any of the historical context or any specific reference to actually going to try and significantly improve the implementation of the MDG on the empowerment of women.
If I can make a general comment, I cannot really comment on this paper that was distributed to you. I have no knowledge about this paper. We were just facilitating the negotiations of the resolution. But if I can just comment on women and MDGs, if you look at all the MDGs, women's issues come across all of them, and it's be it health, be it education, be it HIV, women's issues come across all of these issues. And if you look at the mandate of this entity, it's not only Beijing platform or declaration and platform for action. You have other documents that is referred to there as the mandate of this new entity, including all previous United Nations decisions and resolutions.
And not only that, but also your resolution, but also UN norms and standards. It is so big, so big when you include these, etc. And that's why, because if we didn't mention MDGs, because here the focus of this reform is not only about only to go to MDGs, but it go beyond MDGs. Is broader. It's broader in the scope and in the framework. That's why you don't see it here, because this is it. But the MDGs, women MDGs, it will be focused in other fora when we get in other facilitation, etc. When we got to this high-level meeting for this next coming September.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Okay. Well, first, just for the permanent reps, I wanted, just as a sample of if you could describe how there was an issue that was raised. I know as of last Friday was a sticking point. And it was this idea of how women under occupation would be treated in the resolution that Syria had raised and others supported. I'm just curious if you can give some description of how you resolved that and got to where we are today. And then I did want to ask the DSG very briefly. Maybe this is gender mainstreaming, or maybe it's just how the UN works. But various staff members have raised to me the issue of the after-school program of the UN being closed on 2-day notice about a week ago. And although it may seem like a small issue, it doesn't seem unrelated. So I just wonder what your office and what the Secretariat is if you're comfortable with that closure with so little notice, or if some efforts are going to be made to see whether this 38-year program that has allowed women to work the full 9-to-5 day here will be continued.
Okay, I take one of these questions. Okay, women under foreign occupation. Member states did agree that this entity should have universal coverage. But at the same time, having your universal coverage, there was also the feeling that maybe specific attention should be paid to women who are living in especially vulnerable situations, or especially vulnerable women. And now that the question was whether we should spell out all these especially vulnerable groups, or we should give a general mandate and general task to the new Undersecretary to come up with an organigram that would reflect at the same time the universal coverage, but also the special focus on especially vulnerable women, and how to describe it in a resolution so that everybody's interests are covered, but we don't focus especially on one group and leaving other groups behind. And I think that we did achieve a very good wording in this respect. And as you see also, there is a specific request for the new Undersecretary to come up with an organigram that would reflect all these issues.
In this regard,
Organigram. It's an organizational chart.
Yes, I want to add to that. If you see, for example, the solution always in the UN, you found what is the document that speaks about those things and to make reference to it, because either to single out one element from those, for example, you take, and that's why you take the Beijing Declaration, the Platform of Action, there are 12 critical areas. Among them, there are women under armed conflict, all those kinds of things. Then that's why this is, because those are documents, integrated documents, a coherent document. Then when you mention them, it covers. That's why then we found a solution to mention, to emphasize, or to recall those let's say the Beijing Declaration Platform of Action, and also the outcome of the 23rd special session that cover those items. Thank you.
Yes, about the after-school care program. Well, first of all, I want to let you know that it's not a small matter; it's a big matter. I'm a mother myself. I have an 11-year-old, and I know what it means. And she stays in aftercare, not here in Manhattan, but where she's going to school. So it's a very important thing. And for me, it's something even personal, I should say. We have had staff, parents talking about this. Why it was closed is because, you know very well, in construction it will not be safe to have these children there. There had been discussion between the Department of Management and the office of the representative of the Secretary General to the units, or units representative of the Secretary General. So this went on even before the notice was given. But we are committed to making sure that we have proper work-life balance, and we are looking into alternatives of addressing this issue. So it's very much on the agenda. I'm personally following it up, and I hope we will be able to come with a solution.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Secretary General. Before we close, I'd just like to draw to your attention the fact that we have a very good new website that is going up today that you can find a lot more information on, www.unwomen.org. I would like to thank the Deputy Secretary General and Ambassadors Intelmann and Jomaa for joining us today, and thank all of you for coming. Good
Thank
afternoon.
you very much for your interest and the support as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.